My name is Evelyn, and I'm 42 years old. For most of those years, I've lived right here, on a hill overlooking Willow Creek Valley, in the house my grandmother built with her own 2 hands. It's a place of quiet buzzing, of honeycomb and lavender, a sanctuary where the world makes perfect sense. But I never imagined the day the silence fell would be the day my whole world got louder. Or that the salvation of the entire valley, of every family that ever pointed or whispered, would rest on the delicate golden wings of the very creatures that had always made me their outcast. The story of how they came to beg the mad beekeeper for a miracle is a strange one, full of a quiet, painful kind of poetry, and a justice that tasted sweeter than any honey I've ever harvested. Before I dive into how a valley of proud men was brought to its knees by a handful of bees, I want to connect with all of you out there. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. And if you've ever felt like your voice wasn't being heard, or that your passions were misunderstood, go ahead and hit that like button. For all the new faces here, make sure you subscribe and join this wonderful community of people who understand that sometimes the quietest souls have the most powerful stories to tell. My life has always been measured in the hum of wings. I don't remember a time before the bees. They were my grandmother's legacy, a bustling golden inheritance she passed to me, not in a will, but in quiet afternoons spent among the hives. She was a woman who smelled of beeswax and chamomile tea, and her hands, though wrinkled and crisscrossed with the fine white lines of age, were always steady. "Listen, Evelyn," she would whisper, her voice a low thrum that matched the bees' own. "They're talking. Not with words, like us noisy humans. They speak in patterns, in scent, in the dance." While other children were learning to navigate the chaotic politics of the schoolyard, I was learning the intricate choreography of the waggle dance, a perfect living map to a hidden field of clover. While others coveted friendships built on secrets and chatter, I found a deeper communion in the shared purpose of a hive. People were a language of shifting meanings and hidden intentions, a puzzle I could never seem to solve. Their jokes had barbs, their kindness often felt conditional. But the bees were a model of beautiful, brutal honesty. Their world was one of clear roles, of selfless cooperation, of a single-minded devotion to the colony that was as pure and uncomplicated as sunlight. My grandmother understood. She never pushed me to be more outgoing, to go to the town socials or make friends my own age. She saw the panic that flickered in my eyes in a crowded room, the way I would retreat into myself until I was almost invisible. Instead, she nurtured my connection to the apiary. Some people are oak trees, strong and loud, demanding their space in the forest, she told me once, her hand resting on a hive box that vibrated with life. And some people are the mycelial network, the quiet, hidden threads that connect everything beneath the surface. Both are essential, Evelyn. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. But after she passed, her wisdom was just a memory, and I was left alone on the hill, the quiet thread in a valley of loud, booming oaks. The valley was, and is, orchard country. Generations of families had built their lives on the annual promise of apple, pear, and cherry blossoms turning to fruit. The undisputed king of these orchard families was a man named Thomas Garrison. He was a large man in every sense of the word, large in stature, with a booming voice that flattened all dissent and a confidence that bordered on arrogance. His orchards were the biggest, his apples the crispest, his influence in the valley absolute, and from a very young age he had decided what I was, the town eccentric, Mad Evelyn, the bee witch. The mockery wasn't always loud or direct. Often it was worse. It was the sudden silence when I entered Silas's general store. It was the mothers pulling their children a little closer as I walked by, as if my strangeness were contagious. It was the smirks exchanged over my head at the farmer's market, where I sold my honey and beeswax candles. I remember one summer afternoon, I must have been 19 or 20, standing behind my small table. My honey was arranged in gleaming jars, each one catching the light like a trapped sunbeam. Garrison stopped at the stall next to mine, the one selling oversized tomatoes. He picked one up, held it aloft for his friends to see, and said loud enough for the whole market to hear, "Now this is real farming, good honest dirt and sweat, not like whispering secrets to bugs all day." The laughter that followed was like a physical blow, hot and sharp, and I remember staring down at my own hands, suddenly ashamed of their cleanness, of the lingering scent of lavender and wax that clung to them. I didn't say anything. I never did. I just packed up my jars and went home to the one place my silence felt like peace, not weakness. The deepest cut came from his son, a younger, crueler echo of the father. When I was 16, I had just managed to cultivate my first solo hive, a gentle strain of Italians I'd nurtured from a small nucleus colony. They were my pride, a symbol of my own burgeoning skill. One afternoon, I came out to find the hive smashed to pieces, the frames scattered, the golden combs torn and bleeding honey into the dust. A cloud of confused, dying bees hovered over the wreckage. And lying nearby was a baseball bat, the same one I'd seen Garrison's son and his friends carrying around town. When I gathered the courage to approach Mr. Garrison about it, my voice trembling, he'd clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder, his expression one of paternalistic amusement. "Oh, Evelyn, boys will be boys. A bit of harmless fun. They probably thought it was an old abandoned box. Don't you worry your head about it. Harmless fun." He didn't see the thousands of tiny lives extinguished, the intricate society shattered, the months of my devoted care laid to waste. He saw a broken box. I saw a massacre. That was the day I truly understood that we did not speak the same language. We did not even see the same world. My only real human connection was Silas, the owner of the Valley's general store. He was a man as old and weathered as the wooden planks of his front porch, with eyes that had seen 70-odd seasons of blossoms come and go. He remembered my grandmother, and in me he saw her reflection. He never haggled over the price of my honey, often trading me for flour, sugar, and other staples with a simple, "Your grandmother's honey was the best in this valley. Yours is even better." He was the one person who looked at me without pity or suspicion. He'd lean on the counter, his hands stained with newsprint, and ask, "How are the girls, Evelyn?" He meant the bees. And I would tell him. I'd tell him about a new queen's laying pattern, or a sudden abundance of fireweed nectar, and he would listen, nodding seriously as if I were discussing crop yields or stock prices. He was my anchor to the human world, a quiet affirmation that I wasn't entirely invisible. As the years passed, I watched the valley change. The farming practices became more aggressive, more impatient. The old ways, the ones my grandmother had practiced, were seen as inefficient. Crop-dusting planes became a more common sight, their white plumes drifting over the neat rows of trees. New, powerful pesticides were lauded at town meetings. I knew, with the deep, instinctual certainty of someone who speaks the language of the earth, that this was a mistake. The bees told me so. The hives near the big orchards were always weaker. The queens failed more often. The foragers came back disoriented, their tiny bodies shuddering. I tried to warn them once. There was a town hall meeting about adopting a new systemic pesticide, one that Garrison was championing as a miracle cure for codling moth. I spent a week preparing, my hands shaking as I wrote down notes on bee neurology and the fragility of pollinator populations. I stood up in the crowded, stuffy room, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Mr. Garrison," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. That chemical, it persists in the pollen. It can cause colony collapse." He didn't even let me finish. He smiled that wide, dismissive smile of his and held up a hand. "Thank you for your concern, Evelyn. But why don't we leave the real farming science to the real farmers, eh?" The room filled with condescending chuckles. I sat down, my face burning with a shame so profound it felt like a fever. My carefully prepared notes crumpled into a useless ball in my fist. I retreated back to my hill, to my sanctuary, and focused on protecting my own. I doubled down on my grandmother's methods. I planted acres of diverse pesticide-free wildflowers, borage, and clover. I cultivated hedgerows of native plants, creating a closed, self-sustaining ecosystem. My property became an island, a vibrant, humming bastion of biodiversity in a valley that was slowly turning into a monoculture desert. I was building an ark, and I didn't even know the flood was coming. The first sign that something was deeply wrong was the silence. It arrived one morning in late April, a time when the entire valley should have been thrumming with a billion tiny engines. The orchards were breathtaking, a sea of white and pink blossoms that promised a bumper crop. But the air was still. It was a profound, unnatural quiet that settled deep in the bones. It was the sound of absence. I stood on my porch, a mug of tea growing cold in my hands, and listened. On my property, the world was alive. The air was thick with the buzz of my bees, a symphony of activity as they poured in and out of their hives, their legs heavy with yellow and orange pollen. But beyond the borders of my land, there was nothing. The silence was so complete it was like a sound in itself, a low, menacing hum of wrongness. The news trickled in at first, then became a torrent. It started with a single farmer, then another, then all of them. Their hives were dead. Not just a few weak colonies, but everything. They described finding heaps of bees on the bottom boards, their wings still, their bodies showing no obvious signs of trauma. Other hives were simply empty, a phenomenon the experts on the news were calling colony collapse disorder, a mysterious ailment with a dozen suspected causes, but no single cure. The blight, as the valley residents began to call it, was swift and merciless. It was as if the life force had been snuffed out overnight. Panic, a cold and creeping thing, began to seep into the foundations of Willow Creek. The orchards, in their glorious, useless bloom, became a mockery. They were beautiful monuments to a looming disaster. Without pollination, those blossoms would wither and fall, leaving behind nothing but bare branches. No apples, no pears, no cherries, no income, no future. The town's entire economy, built on the back of that annual harvest, was facing total collapse. I watched it all from my hill. I saw the grim-faced men gathering in small, anxious knots at the edge of their fields, staring at the silent trees. I saw the trucks rumbling into the valley, carrying pallets of new bees purchased at exorbitant prices from breeders hundreds of miles away. A desperate, expensive gamble, and I watched as those new bees, introduced into the poisoned environment, met the same fate as their predecessors. They dwindled and died within a week, succumbing to whatever invisible poison lingered in the pollen and nectar of the valley floor. The pesticide I had warned them about, I suspected, hadn't just killed the pests, it had systematically weakened the bees' immune systems, leaving them vulnerable to a mite or a virus that now ran rampant. They had sterilized their own valley. Thomas Garrison was at the center of the storm, his usual bluster replaced by a frantic, brittle energy. He organized the next attempt, manual pollination. He rallied the townspeople, handing out small paintbrushes and ladders, turning them into a clumsy, earthbound mimicry of a honeybee. I saw them out there, from sunrise to sunset, a small army of desperate humans dabbing at flower after flower. His son, now a grown man with his father's arrogance, directed the work crews with loud, impatient shouts. They worked for 3 days, their backs aching, their necks stiff from staring up into the branches. The sheer scale of the task was astronomical. A single hive of bees can pollinate millions of blossoms in a day. 100 humans, with their clumsy fingers and weary bodies, could barely make a dent in a single acre. On the 4th day, I saw them give up. The ladders were stacked, the paintbrushes tossed into buckets. A kind of hopeless resignation settled over the valley, as thick and stifling as the silent air. During this time, I felt a terrible, thrilling sense of vindication. A cold, hard part of me wanted to watch them fail. I wanted Garrison to stand in his barren orchard and remember the day he laughed me out of the town hall. I wanted him to understand, in the ruin of his own making, the cost of his ignorance. The girl they called Mad Evelyn held the valley's fate in her hands, and the thought was a heady, dangerous nectar. But there was another feeling, a deeper one, that churned beneath the anger. It was a profound sadness. I loved this valley. I loved the rhythm of its seasons, the way the light fell on the hills in the late afternoon. I loved the trees themselves, these ancient living things that had done nothing to deserve this fate. My anger was with the people, but my heart ached for the land. The withering, unfulfilled blossoms felt like a silent scream, and my own bees, safe in their sanctuary, felt it too. Their buzzing seemed more urgent, more insistent, as if they knew the world just beyond their reach was dying. I went to see Silas. The store was empty, the usual morning crowd of farmers absent, likely nursing their despair at home. He was sitting on a stool behind the counter, staring out the front window. "It's bad, isn't it?" I said, my voice quiet in the cavernous room. He turned, his old eyes finding mine. He looked tired. "Bad doesn't cover it, Evelyn. It's biblical. People are talking about ruin. Not just a bad year, but the end of the line for some of them." He poured me a cup of coffee from the pot he always had brewing, his movements slow and deliberate. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, the steam fogging my face. "They know about your bees," he said. It wasn't a question. A farmhand of Garrison saw them. The word is out. I took a sip of the bitter coffee, my stomach twisting into a knot. "What do they want?" Silas let out a short, humorless laugh. "What do you think they want?" "They want a miracle. They want you to fix the mess they made." He leaned forward, his expression hardening. "You don't owe them a thing, Evelyn. Not after the way they've treated you your whole life. You remember what Garrison said about his boy in your hive. Harmless fun. Let them have a taste of what harmless fun looks like when it grows up." His words were a balm on the raw, angry part of my soul. He was right. I owed them nothing. But as I looked out the window at the brilliant, sunlit, silent day, all I could think of were the blossoms curling at the edges, dying of loneliness. It was a week later, when the black truck crawled up my long, neglected driveway. I was in the bee yard, gently smoking a hive before an inspection, my movements slow and practiced. The hum of the bees was a comforting weight in the air, a physical presence. I felt them before I saw them, the low thrum of the engine, the crunch of tires on gravel, an alien sound in my quiet world. I didn't turn around. I continued my work, pulling a frame heavy with capped honey, its familiar sweet scent rising in the warm air. I was in my element, on my land. For the first time in my life, I knew they were coming to me because they had no other choice. The power dynamic of my entire existence had shifted. The engine cut off. 3 doors opened and closed. I heard their footsteps, hesitant and clumsy, on the path. I finally straightened up and turned, my veiled beekeeper's hood still on, the smoker dangling from my hand. It was Thomas Garrison, flanked by 2 other orchard owners, men whose faces I knew, but whose names I had never bothered to learn. They stopped a respectful distance away, looking profoundly uncomfortable. Garrison, the man whose voice could command a room, looked small and diminished amidst the towering life of my sanctuary. The buzzing of tens of thousands of bees seemed to press in on them, a reminder of the power they had come to petition. "Evelyn," Garrison began, his voice strained, stripped of its usual authority. He was trying to look me in the eye, but he couldn't, not with the beekeeper's veil obscuring my face. It gave me an incredible sense of anonymity and control. "We have a problem, a big one." I remained silent, letting his words hang in the humming air. I let the weight of his unsaid panic fill the space between us. One of the other men shuffled his feet. "The blight," he mumbled. It's killed everything." Garrison cleared his throat, forcing himself to continue. "Your bees. We hear your bees are all right, thriving even." He gestured vaguely at the hives stacked neatly around us. "We need your help. We need your bees to pollinate our orchards. We're facing ruin, all of us." He finally managed a direct, pleading gaze, not at my veiled face, but at the general space where my head was. "We're prepared to pay, of course. Handsomely. Whatever your price is, we'll meet it. Just name it." The phrase hung there, suspended in the air, thick with the scent of honey and wax. "Name your price." The words of a man who believed everything, and everyone, could be bought. A man who saw this as a simple transaction, a problem to be solved with money. He still didn't understand. Slowly, deliberately, I reached up and lifted the veil, letting it rest on top of my hood. I wanted him to see my face. I wanted him to see my eyes, clear and steady. "My bees aren't for hire, Mr. Garrison," I said, my voice quiet but carrying easily in the still air. The 3 of them stared at me, their expressions a mixture of shock and disbelief. It was as if I had spoken in a foreign language. Garrison's face began to flush, a tide of red creeping up his thick neck. "What do you mean? This is the survival of the entire valley we're talking about. You'd let us all go bankrupt out of what? Spite? Spite is your word, not mine, I replied, my voice remaining level. This isn't a business transaction. You can't buy a miracle with the same money you used to buy the poison that caused this mess. The accusation landed with a soft thud. He flinched. Now that's not fair, he started, but I cut him off. Isn't it? I seem to recall standing in a town hall, trying to tell you that the miracle cure for codling moth was a poison. I tried to warn you. You told me to leave the farming to the real farmers. His jaw tightened. The other two men were now staring at the ground, wishing themselves anywhere else. So that's it then? Garrison's voice was rising, a tremor of his old arrogance returning. You're going to sit up here on your high horse and watch us all burn? No, I said, and the word was so calm, so final, it seemed to startle him into silence. I am going to give you a choice. You want my help? You want my bees to save your orchards, your livelihood, your legacy? Then you will earn it. I took a step forward, the smoker in my hand swinging gently. Here is my price. It has nothing to do with money. I paused, holding his gaze. The buzzing of the bees seemed to grow louder, a chorus rising in support. First, you will call a town meeting. You will stand in front of everyone, in front of every family that laughed when you made your jokes, and you will apologize. Not a vague political apology for any misunderstanding. You will apologize to the 16-year-old girl whose hive your son destroyed for harmless fun. You will apologize to the young woman you publicly humiliated at the farmer's market, and you will tell them all that you were wrong to dismiss the warnings of the beekeeper you all called mad. You will admit that your pride cost this valley everything. His face went from red to a blotchy, mottled purple. He looked like he was going to explode. You can't be serious, he sputtered. That's humiliation. It's accountability, I corrected him gently, and I'm not finished. I turned my gaze to the other two men, who looked up, startled. My second condition applies to all of you, and every other orchard owner who wants my help. You will all sign a legally binding contract, drafted by my lawyer, to immediately and permanently cease the use of the neonicotinoid pesticides I warned you about. Furthermore, you will commit to planting a 5-foot border of pollinator-friendly wildflowers and clover around every single one of your orchards. You will learn to work with this land, not simply take from it. You will make this valley a place where bees can live again, not just a place where they are brought in to work and die. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum where even the bees seemed to hold their breath. Garrison was trembling with rage. "This is blackmail," he roared, his voice finally breaking free. "You're a vengeful, crazy woman, just like everyone always said. You'd hold our lives hostage for an apology?" "No, Mr. Garrison," I said, my voice as soft as a bee's wing but as sharp as its sting. "This is the consequence. For years, you in this town have mocked the very knowledge that could have prevented this. You dismissed it, belittled it, and now you are drowning in the silence you created. You don't have to accept my terms, the choice is yours. My bees and I are quite happy here on our hill." I turned my back on them then, a gesture of finality, and began to walk back toward my house. It was the boldest thing I had ever done. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to apologize, to soften the blow. But I kept walking. I heard a frantic, whispered argument break out behind me. Garrison's angry protests were cut off by the desperate voice of one of the other men. "We have to, Thomas. For God's sake, we have no choice. It's either our pride or our farms." I reached my porch steps without looking back. I heard a sigh, heavy with the weight of a surrendered kingdom. "All right," Garrison called out, his voice hoarse, defeated. "We accept your terms." I stopped, my hand on the railing, but I did not turn around. "I'll have my lawyer contact you," I said to the buzzing air, and then I walked into my house and shut the door. The town meeting was held 2 days later in the same hall where I had been laughed into silence. The room was packed, every seat filled, with people standing along the walls. The air was thick with tension and a kind of grim curiosity. I stood in the very back, tucked into a shadowy corner, my arms crossed over my chest. Most people didn't even notice I was there. Thomas Garrison walked to the podium at the front of the room. He looked older, smaller than I had ever seen him. He gripped the sides of the lectern, his knuckles white. He cleared his throat, and the microphone screeched, making everyone jump. He began to speak, his voice flat, devoid of its usual booming confidence. "I've called this meeting because there's something you all need to hear from me," he started, his eyes scanning the crowd but avoiding the back corner where I stood. "As you know, we are facing an unprecedented crisis. Our crops, our livelihoods, they're on the brink of disappearing." He took a deep, shuddering breath. "And it's my fault." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. "For years," he continued, his voice cracking slightly, "I have fostered a certain attitude in this valley, an attitude of dismissal towards things I didn't understand, specifically, towards Evelyn and her knowledge of the land." He said my name. He said it clearly, without any of the old mocking cadence. "Years ago, her son destroyed one of my hives, and I dismissed it as a prank. I publicly made jokes at her expense. And most importantly, when she stood in this very room and tried to warn us about the dangers of the pesticides we were using, I cut her off. I humiliated her. I told her to leave farming to the real farmers." He swallowed hard, his face a mask of bitter regret. "Well, it turns out she was the realest farmer among us. She understood the delicate balance we were destroying. I was arrogant, and I was wrong. My pride has brought this valley to the edge of ruin, and for that, to you, Evelyn, wherever you are, I am truly, profoundly sorry." The hall was utterly silent. No one moved. No one whispered. In that moment, the shame that had been my constant companion for decades lifted, floated away, and settled squarely on the shoulders of the man who had given it to me. I slipped out the back door before anyone could turn to look for me. I didn't need their stares, their pity, or their praise. I had heard what I needed to hear. The next morning, I began the slow, sacred work of moving my hives. I loaded them carefully onto my old flatbed truck, securing them for the short journey down the hill. It was a strange parade, my rusty truck laden with buzzing wooden boxes, descending into the silent valley. I worked methodically, orchard by orchard, placing the hives in sheltered spots among the trees. The townspeople kept their distance, watching from their porches or the edges of their fields, as if I were some strange priestess performing an arcane ritual. And in a way, I was. I was reintroducing life into a dead space. The moment I opened the first hive in Garrison's main orchard was one I will never forget. The bees, initially disoriented, poured out of the box. For a moment, they swirled in a confused golden cloud. Then, as if they suddenly understood their purpose, they descended upon the blossoms. The silence was broken. A low, vibrant hum filled the air, a sound the valley had been starved of for weeks. It was the sound of hope. It was the sound of life's return. Over the next 2 weeks, I lived among the orchards, tending to my bees, moving them as they pollinated section after section. People began to leave things for me at the edge of the fields: baskets of fresh bread, jars of last year's preserves, thermoses of hot coffee. They were quiet offerings, apologies and thank yous left unspoken. They were finally learning a language I understood, the language of simple, honest gestures. One afternoon, a little girl, no older than 7, bravely walked up to me while I was inspecting a frame. She wasn't scared, her eyes were wide with wonder. She asked. I smiled, a genuine smile that reached my eyes. "Something like that," I said. "Do they really talk to you?" "They do," I told her, "if you know how to listen." I showed her the queen, a magnificent long-bodied bee marked with a spot of white, moving serenely among her attendants. The girl's gasp of delight was a sweeter sound than any apology. The tide was turning, not just in the orchards, but in the hearts of the next generation. Weeks later, the first signs appeared. The petals fell away, but this time they left behind tiny, hard green nubs at the base of the stem. The pollination had been a success. The valley was saved. The harvest that autumn was smaller than usual, the apples and pears not quite as large, but it was a harvest nonetheless. It was enough. The valley breathed a collective sigh of relief, a community pulled back from the brink. True to their word, the farmers did not use the forbidden pesticides. The following spring, vibrant, chaotic borders of wildflowers bloomed along the neat, orderly rows of the orchards. The valley looked different. It looked more alive, more resilient. My life was different too. The whispers had stopped. The stares I received in town were no longer filled with suspicion, but with a kind of baffled respect. I was still a recluse, still the quiet woman on the hill, but my solitude now felt like a choice, a position of strength, not a retreat from a hostile world. The true test of this new reality came a year later, just before the next bloom. Thomas Garrison drove up my driveway again. This time he came alone, and he brought a jar of his wife's peach preserves as a gift. He was more cordial, more relaxed, as if we were old business partners. "Evelyn," he said, getting straight to the point, "the trees are about to bloom. We were all counting on you and your girls to help us out again. For the good of the community, of course." He smiled, expecting me to simply agree. The old Evelyn would have. The old Evelyn, grateful for this crumb of acceptance, would have given away her labor and her bees' labor for free, just to keep the peace. But I was not the old Evelyn. I met his smile with a calm, placid expression and handed him a neatly folded document. "I'm glad you stopped by, Mr. Garrison. This is the service contract for this year. My lawyer drafted it. It outlines the fees per hive, the liability clauses in case of pesticide exposure, and the schedule for hive placement and removal." He blinked, taking the papers from my hand. His face fell as he scanned the professional, non-negotiable terms. The fee was fair, but it was undeniably a fee. "A contract," he said, sounding bewildered. "I thought we had an understanding." "We do," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "A new one. You wanted me to be a real farmer, a real professional. Well, this is what that looks like. Respect goes both ways, Mr. Garrison. You respect my skill enough to pay for it, and I'll respect your orchard enough to save it." He stared at the contract for a long moment, then at me. He saw not the mad woman, not the strange outcast, but a competent professional who knew her own value. He sighed, a faint smile touching his lips. He pulled a pen from his pocket. "Fair enough, Evelyn," he said, "fair enough," and he signed it. In the end, the apology was not the victory. The respect was not the victory. The victory was the quiet click of that pen on paper. It was the moment I realized my worth was not something they could grant me. It was something I had to claim for myself. I am still the woman who communicates better with her honeybees than with people. I still prefer the gentle hum of the hive to the noise of the town, but something inside me has settled. The shame that was a constant low buzz in the background of my life has gone silent. I found my voice not by shouting, but by stating my terms in a quiet, unwavering tone. I learned that true strength isn't about being loud. It's about building a sanctuary so strong and so vital that the rest of the world has no choice but to come to you and listen. They called me mad for listening to the world around me, for hearing the whispers of the bees and the groans of the land. It turns out, the real madness was not listening at all. My story is about bees, but I think it's also about finding your value in a world that tries to tell you you have none. It's about understanding that the very things that make you strange might just be the things that make you essential. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey today. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever been underestimated or had your passion dismissed by others? How did you find the strength to prove your own worth, either to them or, more importantly, to yourself? Your stories give so much strength to this community. Don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you, and please subscribe for more stories about finding your power in unexpected places. Share this with anyone you think might need to hear that it's okay to be the quiet one in the corner. That's often where the real magic is happening. Thank you for listening. I wish you all the strength to tend to your own gardens, whatever they may be.